Good evening, and welcome in to FTV Gamenight. I'm your host, Pearson Fowler. He's Chris Adele. Got a great show for you tonight, talking the great scapegoat of the NFL, Tony Romo. In college, should Jadeveon Clowney be criticized for not playing against Kentucky? And later, we'll be bringing on Stephen Dixon for a three-man panel discussion about the Denver Broncos. All this and more after the break. Welcome back into FTV Gamenight. We're talking a little NFL. All right, so Chris, last night, Tony Romo has a monster game, a career game, a legendary game. 25 of 36, 506 yards, 5 touchdowns, but the only thing anyone's talking about is the one interception he threw late in the game. I think it's a little unfair to criticize him. I think it's a little unfair to criticize anybody but your defense when you give up 51 points in a single game, yet people still find a way to make Tony Romo the scapegoat for this Cowboys team, and I don't understand it, and I disagree with it. What's your take on this?
Well, I think he played a fantastic game. Obviously, the one mistake he did make was very untimely at the end of the game, and it's easy to make him the scapegoat. And I think the reason people do blame him so much for this game, even though the defense let in 51 points, is because that's how Tony Romo's performed in his career, honestly. I mean, he's been a starter for 8 years, made this playoffs only 3 out of those 8. He just finds ways to lose games throughout the stretch of his career. And I think unless he wins the Super Bowl in the next few years, that's going to be his legacy. And though it is unfair, that's the reason that he's being blamed for this game.
Well, it's really awful because I feel like, again, if you let in 51 points at the professional level, that's completely unacceptable, and no one's talking about the atrocious performance by the Cowboys defense. Granted, this is an incredible offense in Denver. They've been seemingly unstoppable all year, and Tony Romo led them to 48 points over the course of the game. He did everything right to win the game, except for the ill-fated pass, if you will, at the end of the game, which didn't even really seem to be Romo's fault. It was a bad route by a rookie tight end. He curved his drag route a little more than he should have, and then just a great play by the Denver Broncos defensively. I really don't think that it's fair to criticize Romo, but people are going to continue to do it until he wins. But this situation is starting to remind me of, and has for a while now, what we've seen in the past with LeBron James. You know, LeBron James would play 47 minutes of perfect basketball. He'd have a triple-double. He'd have 35 points and just be an absolute stalwart on defense. But if he didn't make the game-winning shot, people told him he wasn't clutch. People called him a bum until he came through late in Game 6. So the first 10 years of his career, he was the best basketball player in the world. Everyone accepted that. But because he couldn't win, or because he couldn't make the big shot at the end of the game, you know, people called him a bum. People said he couldn't do it, and people like Skip Bayless were just absolutely relentless with him. And I think it's completely unfair if any athlete, again, LeBron James, Tony Romo, if they get you that far in the game and then maybe just can't close it out. While it is fair to criticize them because it is their job, I mean, they have to be a complete player. They have to play just as well in the first minute of the game as they do the last minute. You have to have some help, and the Cowboys didn't get that at all. They didn't get help from anybody. Without Romo, this game could have been 51-3.
Right. Yeah, I think the difference, like, obviously LeBron James has gone under a lot of heat the last few years, but he's won 2 championships, and I still think, while it is unfair that he gets all this criticism, especially for this game where he played one of the statistically best games of NFL history, until he wins a championship and wins in the playoffs and proves he's a winner, he's going to get this. I mean, obviously you want to have good stats and you want to throw lots of touchdowns, but at the end of the day, the only stat that matters is the win column.
Well, and here's another interesting point. You mentioned LeBron James. A lot of the heat, no pun intended, has been taken off of him in recent years because he does have the championships. But you saw he tried for 8 years to do it in Cleveland, and he couldn't do it alone. It's only when he went to Miami and you have guys like Ray Allen, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh around you helping you win those championships. I mean, we saw last night, Romo has guys that can catch some of his passes. He's got guys that can run the ball, but again, giving up 51 points is ridiculous. I mean, you can't win any games if you're giving up 51 points. So, I still think it's unfair to criticize Romo when you don't have help around him. That's the only reason LeBron has won the championships, and basketball is even easier to do because there's 5 men on the court at a time. You don't have to worry about another 21 other players that aren't yourself, not doing their jobs. But moving forward, after what you saw from the Cowboys offense last night, I mean, there still have to be a lot of positive takeaways from this
Right,
game.
definitely.
I mean, Denver's been absolutely unstoppable this year, and while the Cowboys didn't even come close to stopping them, they scored enough points to put themselves in a position to win. Do you think that they've shown that they have enough to win what is a very weak NFC East after last night?
Yeah, I mean, like Denver, I think is going to be one of the best teams in the NFL. Obviously, they're one of 3 remaining undefeated teams, and I think holding them, losing to them by only 3 and playing them very hard the whole game has got to be a positive. Obviously, the defense was abysmal, and you really got a lot of question marks on there. But you're playing the best offense in the league with a Peyton Manning who's got 20 touchdowns and 1 interception in 5 games. I mean, he's still on pace for 64 touchdowns. He's been on pace for that the whole season. It's not changing. I mean, no one's stopping that offense right now. And obviously, they'll be upset that they lost this game. But I think Dallas can come back and play well for the rest of the season.
And we've seen the Eagles up and down all year. The Giants are probably the second worst, maybe the worst team. And the Redskins are still kind of a mess. Maybe they'll find their groove late in the season. But if you're Jason Garrett, are you more unhappy with your defense at giving up 51 points to Denver, or are you more excited that your offense was able to score 48 points, granted against a Denver defense that was missing Von Miller, that was missing Danny Trevathan, missing some guys, but you're still able to score 48 points, and I mean Tony Romo just playing out of his mind.
I mean, I think you'll feel optimistic about your offense, but it is a Denver defense that hasn't really played very well. I think that's been masked by the offensive domination by Peyton Manning. Honestly, I think you've got to be pretty upset with your defense, and they cannot play like that if they want to expect to make the playoffs for the first time in 3 years.
All right. Well, join us after the break. We'll be talking a little college football and Jadeveon Clowney. Should he be criticized for sitting out of the Kentucky game, and whether or not his draft stock will fall after his lack of performance? All this and more after the break. Welcome back into FTV Gamenight. Thanks for being with us tonight. Talking a little college football now. All right, so on Saturday, junior defensive end Jadeveon Clowney, one of the most talked about players in the country outside of probably Johnny Manziel, made a last-minute decision before South Carolina's matchup with Kentucky to not play, saying that he had a rib contusion, he was too hurt to play. A lot of people were upset about this, Spurrier included, who himself after the game said, if Jadeveon wants to play, we'd love to have him. What do you feel about these comments and about Jadeveon Clowney sitting out Saturday's game?
Obviously we don't know how he feels, and we don't know what kind of position he feels that he's in. I mean, he's months away from potentially being the number 1 pick and being, after his rookie contract done, one of the highest paid players in the NFL. Obviously that's a lot of pressure for him, but I think what frustrates fans with this is the last second dropping out, and I think people are going to say he's had a lack of effort throughout the season, and people want to see him finish his junior season hard. Obviously, the only reason he's here for his last year is because he has to play for 3 years before he can go to the NFL. But I think people, especially fans that have really been looking forward to this year for a long time, I think they're going to expect more effort out of him and see him on the field next Saturday.
Yeah, I think aside from the fans being frustrated, I think the coaches, especially Steve Spurrier, are frustrated just because this was a very last-second decision. And that's something that Jadeveon is going to have to be careful with moving forward because he is under the spotlight. He's such a heavily scrutinized player. A lot of NFL scouts, might look at this and say, does he have some character issues? Does he have some issues with being committed to his team? But you have to think about what he's going through. If he has a rib contusion, that's no fun to play through. He's been dealing with bone spurs in his foot all year. If he really wanted to, he could have just been sitting out all year saying that the bone spurs were too much. But the fact is, he's been playing through it. I think playing Kentucky at home, South Carolina expected to deal with them better than they ended up doing. So I think Clowney figured if he was going to miss a game, it better be that one, especially South Carolina now going on the road for 3 straight weeks. Maybe he just wanted to ensure that he would be healthy enough to help his team on a 3-game road stretch at Arkansas, where South Carolina is only 2-8 in the last 20 years. going on the road to a pretty good Missouri team and on the road to Tennessee, who we just saw almost upset Georgia. So it could just be precautionary. The other thing that I think is important to think about is Jadeveon Clowney has been in a program that while it's been on the rise, he's seen a lot of nasty things. I mean, you've seen 2 season-ending knee injuries to running back Marcus Lattimore that has effectively ended his career. He got picked up by the San Francisco 49ers, but isn't even on the practice squad this year. He's basically getting paid to rehab, actually, which is kind of a sweet deal if you ask me. But you know, I still think a guy like Jadeveon Clowney, he plays football for a reason because he's good at it, but he loves it. If he didn't want to play football, he wouldn't do it. So I don't think he's excited about not getting to play. This guy loves being on the football field, and a lot of people criticize his effort. I've seen on more than one occasion Jadeveon Clowney, you know, they'll run sweep right. He runs all the way around the other side of the field, chases the play down from behind. I've seen him almost block a punt on several occasions this year. I think it's unfair to criticize his effort, and you have to think about, again, the nagging injuries that he's had, the bone spurs. He had the foot sprain last year, the rib contusion, and just what kind of future he has and how he's seen other players in this program have their careers cut short by devastating injuries.
Right. I agree with that, and I think it's very important for him to go in healthy to the draft. I mean, obviously he's going to have off-season surgery to fix up his foot and stuff, but I just feel like college football is all about like the passion and love for the game, and I don't think it's fair to his team just like pull out of the game right before and have all 50 of the other guys suit up and go out there. And I mean, he's a leader on that team, and like South Carolina needs him on the field and to have a positive attitude, because he can't go into the draft with the attitude, I'm the best player in the draft, I don't really care about college football anymore. Because, I mean, honestly, I don't think teams are going to pass him up in the draft, but they're not going to like that attitude at all.
No, certainly not. And, well, but the other thing to think about is he's really going to have, I mean, this year he's only had 12 tackles and 2 sacks, which is a little bit behind where he was last year, where he had 13.5 sacks for the year. But the other thing that he's got to think about is there are a lot of teams in the NFL that are bad, like Jacksonville, that are going to be looking for a quarterback. And there are a lot of good quarterbacks in this draft. You're going to have guys like Taj Boyd and Aaron Murray who have proven that they can play at high levels, and they're going to be a really high draft stock. And if a team like Jacksonville, who doesn't have, I mean, Blaine Gabbert's not their franchise guy, they're going to be looking for someone like Aaron Murray that they can plug and, you know, go ahead and win 6-7 games next year. Mm-hmm. He's going to have to prove that he's going to make the same kind of impact as a first-round draft pick that a quarterback can make. And, you know, so far this year, he hasn't necessarily shown it. You know, a lot of teams game planning against him, which is working against his favor. Draft analysts are going to be able to break that down and see through that. But he's gonna have to play. He's going to have to continue to be a leader. And the other thing that I feel like we should be talking about a little more is less about how mad the coaches are and how mad the fans are. One of the things that makes college football so great is the fan passion, the great stadiums. You know, you're on a college campus. That's an outstanding environment for these kind of things. South Carolina raised their season ticket price $6 this year because they have guys like Jadeveon Clowney that people are going to want to pay to come see.
Right.
And when he doesn't dress out at the last minute, that's frustrating for the coaches. It's frustrating for the fans, his teammates, and who knows, that Kentucky game could have very easily turned out differently if Clowney was there to impact the game.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, South Carolina has done so much for him, and obviously he's played very well in his first 2 years, but he's got a commitment to finish this season and play the best of his ability, and this is the year people thought that South Carolina had a chance to win a championship, and he needs to do his best to, like, deliver on that.
Yep, and, you know, people can criticize him for all those things because he has just such a high such a high potential, has a high ceiling, but he has to realize that, and he's not going to realize that just sitting on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. His teammates are counting on him, so I definitely think you'll see him back in the Arkansas game, even though he's still going to be dealing with that bone spur injury that's going to be nagging all year. But I think these next 3 weeks are going to go a long way in determining this guy's character and really going forward how he's going to be remembered. Really, what his legacy in South Carolina is going to be. Right. That's all the time we have for now. Join us on the other side of the break. We'll be joined by Stephen Dixon talking about the Denver Broncos and a little more NFL. You're watching FTV Gamenight. Welcome back into FTV Gamenight. We're joined now by friend of the show and Packers homer, Stephen Dixon. Woo! All right, we're talking the Denver Broncos this weekend. Denver Broncos, who a lot of people think are the best team in the NFL, and just scored 51 points against the Cowboys. They're a 28-point favorite over Jacksonville, who a lot of people think are the worst team in the NFL, then maybe the Giants.
Right. No, the Jags are the worst.
Okay.
But continue.
28 points is a lot in the NFL when these are all professional athletes, and most of these games are pretty close. Is 28 points unreasonable?
I'm not going to say unreasonable, but you have to think about this for a second. If I'm a bettor, because remember, these are what point spreads are for, so I'm in Vegas, and I see that the Broncos are 28-point favorites over the Jacksonville Jaguars, another NFL team. You know, I contemplate a score, and I think, okay, a reasonable score of this game would be 35-10. Would you say that?
That sounds reasonable. That sounds like the low end.
Right. I
Okay.
agree with that.
So 35 minus 10, that's 25. That covers, or that beats the spread. Okay, instead of 28, it's 25, and I think that's reasonable. And I think it's easy money just because of the fact that I think the Broncos are going to have this game wrapped up so early because they're going to be so dominant defensively and offensively. They're going to jump out to a big lead by the third quarter. You won't be seeing them throw the ball very much. They're going to run it. They're going to just completely kill the clock. And Jacksonville might score a garbage touchdown late against, the third string Bronco defense. And the final score could be like something 35-17, 42-17, and it covers. So I'm not going to say unreasonable, but if I'm a bettor, I'm taking the Jaguars in this situation. Not saying they're going to win, just saying that they're going to beat the spread, and I'm going to take home my money. What do you think, Chris?
I think, obviously, the starters are going to play the first half, and I think Denver is going to have a very quick first half. I mean, they score lots of points fast, and I think Peyton Manning's got that record in the back of his head, and I think he's going to score a lot of touchdowns in the first half. And while, yes, early third quarter, he might come out, I think, like you're saying, 35-10 would be a reasonable score. I think they'll score more than 35, and I don't see Jacksonville scoring more than 10 at all.
Okay. They don't need to score more than 35, though. Let's remember, when they hung 50 on the Eagles, let's remember, they scored a defensive touchdown and a special teams touchdown.
Well, those count.
And the Eagles have an explosive offense. They need it. And let's just face it, I don't think that's going to happen, again, to where they have the ridiculous amount of defense. I think they had multiple, 3 or so defensive and special teams touchdowns. You're not going to see that repeating again, and they won't feel the need to put up the score they did because they're not facing Chip Kelly's offense. They're facing Blaine Gabbert and the Jaguars offense, this team that scored 2 points on the Kansas City Chiefs. So I'm not saying that, Denver could easily, if they really tried, they could win this game by 70. If Peyton Manning, had the same effort that he did last week against the Cowboys, 5 touchdowns, 1 pick. But they're not going to need to, and I'm just going to base off the prediction that the Broncos, second half, run the clock down, end the game, and honestly, what happens when guys think about records is what happens if, you have to think this in the back of your mind too, if you're the Broncos. Okay, you're going to start running up the score, that's when defenses, come up with cheap shots, right? And what's the last thing you want on your aged quarterback that's had 2 neck surgeries? Okay, let's remember that. You do not want him taking any unnecessary shots when you had the game won. I honestly think, too, that Denver's defense has struggled. You saw last week 48 points against Tony Romo and the Cowboys. I know you're playing Jacksonville's offense, but garbage time late, I can see Jacksonville maybe putting up 17 to 20 points if they really, if Denver's defense completely shuts down in the second half. You saw it with the Redskins and the Packers earlier this year. You saw it with the Eagles in week 1 against the Redskins. They almost let them come back all the way in the game after being up 31-3. It could easily happen. I got to consider that how teams play in blowouts, and I don't think Denver's going to run up a score. What do you think?
Yeah, well, like you said, they don't need to. Again, a 38-year-old quarterback with 2 neck surgeries, you want to keep him in the game basically as short as possible just to ensure the win, which they should have locked up at the half. But here's some considerations. They give up 27 points to a Ravens offense, which has shown nothing this year. 23 points to a Giants offense, which is one of the worst in the league. 21 points to a Raiders offense with an inexperienced quarterback. They give up 20 points to the Eagles, which was, I guess, one of their better defensive games. But like you said, they scored a couple of defensive touchdowns in that game. And then 48 2 nights ago to Tony Romo and the Cowboys. Granted, Tony Romo did have a legendary night, he had a career night, but
it's a big concern for them.
well, it's a huge concern. They have question marks on defense. Von Miller is still going to be out for one more game. Danny Trevathan's out, and then Champ Bailey's still out. A lot of question marks, a lot of injuries. They're thin in a lot of areas. On that defense, they've been able to win because they've been able to outscore teams. I'm not going to say that Denver's going to get in a shootout with Jacksonville, because that's not going to happen.
No, the game.
But Jacksonville should be able to score 14, 17 points, even if 3, 7, even 10 of those are late. But I agree with you. I think Denver doesn't have any reason to play Peyton Manning and Noshawn Moreno and Eric Decker, those guys, much into the fourth quarter, if at all in the third quarter. I think you're going to see guys coming out. You're going to see the backup quarterback. You're going to see basically them being cautious, because, like you said, if you start to run up the score, if you try to score 100 points in this game, which they probably could, you're going to see a lot of defensive guys coming up taking cheap shots. So 28 points. I don't want to say unreasonable, because Denver absolutely could.
If you were in Vegas right now and you had to pick, are you going to pick the Broncos in this situation? Are you going to take the favorites? Or are you going to take the underdogs? Oh, only point spread.
Yeah, I would take Jacksonville against the spread, just because. Well, I'm not a betting man, but if I was,
I'm not either. It's fun to play, right?
Right. Yeah, but I don't think they can absolutely win by 28 points. I don't think they will. So I would pick Jacksonville against the spread in this game.
And another thing I want to add too is this is going to be the week when you see Peyton Manning. He's going to leave in the third quarter, just because they're going to be up. I'd say 35-3, 35-10 games in the books. I mean, you're not Blaine Gabbert. Let's face it, in that offense, they're not going to be a threat to score 28 points and a half. So you're going to see a lot of Brock Osweiler, and that could be a situation where he makes that young quarterback mistake, and that Jacksonville can maybe get some points off of defense and special teams too. You can't. I mean, I just think it's a little disrespectful. I know the Jags are bad. They're one of the worst teams I've ever seen. I've watched like a quarter of them, one of their games. They're horrible. But let's face it, they're still a pro football team. And the Broncos have flaws. They're not the greatest team to ever set foot on the football field. 28 points, it's a little ridiculous. That's the highest I think I've ever seen in the NFL. I remember before this year, before the Seahawks had a 20-point edge over the Jags in the spread, the biggest I saw was maybe a 13-point spread the Patriots had over like the Browns. And the funny thing is the Browns won that game. So, by a lot actually. I just think it's a little outrageous to if you're a bettor, to take the Denver Broncos in this situation, just because if you beat a team by 28, that's already a huge blowout. That's a 38-10 game. I think it's safe to say that the Broncos win comfortably, but not that comfortably. Anything to add, Chris?
I think, obviously, you're talking about how the Denver defense hasn't performed very well in the past few weeks. But I think after letting in 48 points to, obviously, much more talented Dallas offense, they're going to be a little fired up. They're going to have a chip on their shoulder. They don't want to play second fiddle to this offense. They want to be, the reason that Denver goes to the championship.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Real quick, we've seen the question marks with Denver, but Champ Bailey will be coming back. Von Miller will be back week after next to sort of revitalize this defense that's been struggling all year. But we've seen a lot of good things from Kansas City, especially defensively, especially from Alex Smith, especially from Jamal Charles, and they're also undefeated. At this juncture in the season, which team do you think is better? A Denver offense that doesn't seem like they can be stopped, or a Kansas City team that's efficient on offense and dynamite on defense?
Peyton Manning, quarterback, Broncos, Kansas City right behind them. They're efficient. Come playoff time, I trust my quarterback, Peyton Manning.
Does it matter to you where they're playing? If they play in Kansas City, would you still take Denver? And likewise, would you take Kansas Denver or Kansas City in Mile High?
In Kansas City, I'd take Kansas City, but like in a playoff situation where I think the Broncos are going to be the home field team, take the Broncos.
Chris?
I'm going to disagree. I think the more complete team would do well. I mean, we saw last year the Baltimore Ravens coming in and beating the Broncos on home turf.
All right. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us on FTV Gamenight. We're on a 167.5-hour break. We'll see you same time next week. Welcome back into FTV Gamenight. We're joined now by friend of the show and Packers enthusiast, Stephen Dixon. What are we talking about?
We are talking.
All right, wait, start over.
Damn it.